tonight. We have a great series of other programs coming up, which we'll talk about at the end. But right now, let's talk about the Wild West, the real West. Well, the worst, some called it. The former, the frontier area west of the Mississippi River during the late 1800s included the territories of Dakota, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Colorado. The untamed territories they were noted for their lawlessness, which gave rise to wild, rowdy, unrestrained, disorderly, and rude behavior. All it lacked to be paradise was plenty of water and society. Well, the Wild West lasted for about 40 years. It began after the Civil War in 1865 and ended about 1895. What happened in between was the whole Western movement. The real West wasn't where or when, but it was who. It was real people. They were pioneers and builders, and all of them restless and dissatisfied. And the contented ones stayed in the East. So who went west? Well, perhaps it was three Ohio teenagers running away from home to find gold or to fight Indians. Maybe it was a New York or New Jersey newlyweds off to build a new homestead in the West. Perhaps it was a Hartford widow hoping to find a new husband and a father for her children. Maybe it was a Charleston piano maker deserting his wife and his creditors. A foreclosed New York State farmer looking for greener and unmortgaged pastures. A seminary graduate looking to find new flock out west where he could spread the word of God. And to lead them into the wilderness, they all engaged a professional wagon master with the authority of a sea captain and honorary title as major. These, then, were the ones that went west. They and thousands of them, like and unlike them. They went in wagons, carts, buggies, and some walked all the way, more than 2,500 miles. They had three basic motives for going: to get something, to get away from something, and just to get there. Well, most of the pioneers would take nothing with them but hope and what they could store in their wagon. And a few took nothing with them but memories of the places that they would never see again. But what drew them west? Well, one reason was free land. President Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act in May 20th of 1862. And on January 1st, 1863, Daniel Freeman made the first claim under the act, which gave citizens or future citizens up to 160 acres of public land, provided that they lived on it. And once you'd move on to that land, you improved it, then you would file for the deed. And any U.S. citizen who had never taken up arms against the United States and were at least 21 years of age was eligible. Another group, African American slaves, they traveled west to get their freedom. Runaway slaves gained freedom if they made to these new lands out west. There they could start a new life as a farmer, maybe loggers, maybe cowboys, maybe gold miners. Anyone who was head of a household could apply to attain a federal land grant. Women could file for a land grant. However, they had to have lived on the land for at least 5 years and show improvements. It doesn't quite seem fair that the women had to wait a lot longer. Well, during the 1840s and 1850s, people read newspaper stories about the wonderful land in the West. Land to the west was supposed to have mild weather and rich soil. News publications painted enticing pictures of lush, available Western lands, and that put thousands of people on the trail headed west. Well, overcrowded cities in the West caused others to flee westward. And one writer claimed that the beets grew at least 3 feet in diameter, where turnips were 5 foot around. From stories like these, people caught the Western hoe fever and longed to go west and start a new life. Some hoped to find cheap, fertile land, while other settlers made money in the logging business. Well, there were plenty of trees in the Pacific Northwest and the great demand for them in the East. People in the East were still building and they needed lumber. So many people went to the Pacific Northwest, did logging, and sent the logs back east or the lumber back east. And settlers came from every part of American society. Many were farmers, cattlemen, and homesteaders. They all went west to build a ranch or a farm in this new land of opportunity. Settlers also include tradesmen, businessmen, journalists, adventurous, missionaries, gamblers, and gold miners. So let's talk a little bit about the gold rush. Well, the gold rush began on January 24th, 1848, when gold was found by James W. Marshall at Sutter's Mill in Colma, California. James Marshall was a carpenter and a sawmill operator who reported the findings of gold along the American River in California. Well, that was the start of the gold rush. Even though they tried to keep the gold discovery quiet, word soon got out. Newspapers all over the country started to report that gold had been found. And by May 1848, a few hundred gold seekers came to California. But by the end of the year, they numbered in the thousands. Before long, people throughout the United States and other countries flocked to California to make their riches in gold. Well, the mill property was owned by James Sutter, who employed Marshall to build his mill. The wave of gold seekers turned everyone's attention away from the mill, which eventually fell into despair and was never used as it was intended. Neither Marshall or Sutter ever profited from the gold find. Marshall first found the gold, but he decided to set out on his own. He became a partner in a gold mine in nearby Kelsey, California, but the mine yielded nothing and left Marshall practically bankrupt. Sutter said, "By this sudden discovery of gold, all my plans were destroyed. Had I succeeded for a few years before gold was discovered, I would have been the richest citizen on the Pacific shore. But it had to be different. Instead of being rich, I am ruined." And that was because the United States Land Commission proceedings, they went against awarding Sutter his title to his land, which had been given to him by the Mexican government. And he himself blamed the influence of squatters and people who immigrated to Sutter's land and took up residence. It actually went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they eventually decided that parts of the title that he did have were invalid. Well, he died in 1880, having fought the rest of his life unsuccessfully for compensation for the loss of his property. Boomtowns grew up very quickly, and by the end of the gold rush, more than 300,000 people had migrated to California. Gold seekers were called the 49ers for the year 1949, when the gold rush was at its peak. The gold rush lasted 4 years, and by 1852, 49ers had mined gold worth more than $80 million. An astonishing amount of gold was pulled from the ground. $10 million in 1849, $41 million, which was actually equivalent to about $971 million in today's dollar, and in 1850, $75 million in 1851, and $81 million in 1852. So that was a lot of money and a lot of gold. Well, after that, the take generally declined until 1857, when it leveled off to be about 45 million per year. The fortune bettered their circumstances but mining was required. Above all, it required luck, and not everybody got lucky. So there were three basic routes to get there, and people had they could take routes that both had advantages and disadvantages. I'm going to go back just a second here to show that map again. That map was showing what they call around the Horn. It went all the way around South America, all the way to San Francisco. And it was dangerous because it was an overseas voyage from the East Coast. It required going all the way around South America, but the most dangerous part was the tip of the trip was the Strait of Magellan. It was due to the narrowness and unpredictable currents. The men who would choose to travel this route did not have the option to bring their families along, as traveling by ship was far too dangerous. And approximately 25,000 people traveled this route, and it took them about 9 months to complete. And traveling around the Horn cost about $800. The next method was the Overland route, which meant traveling by covered wagon and generally could be completed in 100 days. Approximately 40,000 people chose that route. This route was much safer and more comfortable than around the Horn, and the men who participated in travels on this route had the option to bring their family along. Gold hunters converged on St. Louis to buy supplies for the 2,000-mile journey ahead. Most overlanders had no idea what they were doing, and they were very easy prey for con men selling fake guidebooks. Useless gold detecting machines and lameless horses. Another downfall of the overland route was that travelers often faced rivers, food shortage, and Indian attacks. It was estimated that the journey would cost a man and his family about $1,000 if you went across land. The third route was actually called the Isthmus or Nicaragua route. That was the quickest of all three routes, and as well as the most popular. This route was traveled by steamships from the east coast of the United States to San Francisco. And that route it differed from around the Horn because it went through the Panama Canal rather than all the way around South America. And although it was the quickest route, taking about half the time of the other routes, it was not the safest. Many people died during the journey from diseases such as malaria, cholera, dysentery, and yellow fever. Also, there were not enough ships to take people from the canals from San Francisco, so travelers who went that route often had to wait a long time for a next available ship to take them on the rest of their journey around to San Francisco. Well, after news of finding gold in the West reached the eastern states in September of 1849, there was a group of men from Schoharie County, right here in New York, and they immediately formed what was called the Manual Protection and Joint Stock Company. Now, this was a group of local men right here in upstate New York, and they got together and they called themselves the Mohawk Mining Expedition, which consisted of 19 able-bodied persons, and they pledged to put in $100 or more to be paid by February 10th, 1849, for the purchase of provisions and supplies to sustain the company for 1 year from the time of disembarkment. Well, this expedition group decided to take the seaward voyage around South America, so they went all the way around. Nelson Ben Camp was the first to leave for California. He went ahead of everyone else, and he sailed for the Gold Coast, the California Gold Coast, on January 18th, 1849. Well, the others of the group followed, but they departed from New York aboard a ship named the Henry Harbeck. It was a 800-ton vessel, and within the first week, most of the passengers were sick in their beds with seasickness. They arrived in Rio de Janeiro on April 26th, and Mr. White became homesick, so he returned back home to New York. And he was the only one of the group that left and never made it all the way around. So by May 1st, they began their voyage around the much dreaded Cape Horn. And by July 6th, they reached Valparaiso. And it was there that they met up with 30 other vessels, all headed to San Francisco. Well, on Monday, September 18th in 1849, they sighted land and found that they were in the very close vicinity of the harbor of San Francisco. Some of the mines were about 50 miles west of San Francisco near Stockton, and only one of the five would go to the mines ever succeeded in obtaining anything for their efforts. Well, Nelson Van Camp went directly to the mines, and Benjamin Blivens began working as a carpenter. And these are all still men of that same Schoharie group, the Mohawk Mining Company. But Benjamin Bevins, as working as a carpenter since building was in such high demand, he was making between $10 and $12 a day, which was pretty good for wages at that time. Well, William Hotelling became very ill, and his brother T.J. Hotelling and Byron Gallup remained back to take care of him. After his recovery, they were to follow the others to the mines and bring food and provisions. However, T.J. Hotelling became very ill and he died. And his brother William had been ill for about 3 weeks. He died a few days later. So Mr. Gallup and Reverend Sprague, they were able to purchase one coffin for $48. That's all they could find. So they had to find boards, which were very scarce and in high demand, to build the second coffin. And it cost them $31 to buy the boards just to build the second coffin. So that gives you an idea how expensive the wood was back then. Well, the Hotelling brothers were buried about a mile from Stockton. So unfortunately, they never made it to the gold mines. And then the rainy season hit, which put a halt to any mining. And the group went to Stockton, where they remained the entire winter. Many men decided to leave and go back home by that time. So there were some that made it, but then they got frustrated and decided to go back. Each ship that left from San Francisco carried a full load of the Atlantic states to the Atlantic states, some in influence, but many had barely enough money to pay for their passage home. Of the Mohawk Mining Company, not one of them made anything from mining gold, but 5 or 6 of them had bettered their condition. A few remained behind, and they opened a restaurant, a hotel, and a bar in Stockton called the Exchange Restaurant, one of the largest hotels in Stockton. And Mr. Thomas Ward of Fulton, New York, was the proprietor. Colonel Asa Mattis, Mr. Greeley, William Bouck, Mr. Rowley, and Seneca Gallup, they all remained behind in Stockton. And on December 31st, 1849, they all gathered at a bar and gave 3 cheers for old Schoharie and those that braved the journey. So that was one of our local connections that went to the West Coast. There's another interesting story, and this is a story of a woman from Cobleskill, New York, and her name was Flora Riddle, and she also went hunting for gold. Most that went for gold were wanting to make their own way or have their own money in life. And so Flora was married and had 3 children at the time. She read in the newspaper of people striking it rich in Alaska. So she decided she was going to take such an adventure, regardless of if she was married or not. So at age 35, she left her 3 children and her husband, and they all and left by train and headed west. And the entire village of Cobleskill was aghast that a woman would do such a thing, go west and leave her family behind. Well, Flora successfully made it to the Klondike, and she prospered enough to buy several mines. She returned back home to Cobleskill to find that her husband had died, and 2 of her children were sent off to live in an orphanage in Albany. Her oldest son was living in Cobleskill, so she purchased a home in Cobleskill and hired a family to care for her children. until they were old enough to join her on the West Coast. She went back to the Klondike, where she proceeded to lose everything in the next 3 years. She then had another stroke of good luck and enough to buy Dawson's Mill. And it was said the next time she came back to Cobblescale, she carried a bag full of diamonds and gold nuggets as witness to her prosperity. Well, what was it like to be a pioneer? Those who left on the East Coast and headed west overland, most of them met up in the Midwest to follow one of the six routes that you see outlined here on the map. And depending on where they were going, they would either take a northern route or a southern route. They gathered at the river, and that river was the Missouri River. And it was here where that was the last outpost of civilization. Here they would meet up with others headed west, and they would form a wagon train. The pioneers who traveled west had a conscious sense of the need to organize. Many of them pooled their resources and sold shares of stock. They had their own bylaws and officers. And articles were drawn up and signed by wagon train members who had to swear that they were industrious, not addicted to cards, they weren't addicted to strong drink or profane language, and sweet and personable disposition. They also must observe the Sabbath. Many companies broke up over arguments of whether or not to observe the Sabbath. One pioneer wrote, "How can we observe the Sabbath? Here it is in the middle of June and we're already behind. And all these people are passing us by on a Sunday. They're rolling right on by. How can we just sit here?" So they had arguments about it, and many companies split up over the moral question of whether to observe the Sabbath or not. Well, out west of here, cash money would have no cash value. So it was swapped off for things like wood, coffee, ship's biscuit, hog tallow, dried apples, wagon wheels, quinine, guns, and gold separating machinery and plows. The journey lasted for 4 to 6 months and covered about 2,000 miles. Wagon space was so limited that pioneers were forced to leave most of their comforts of home behind. And when the way got steep, they often had to toss a lot of their treasures out along the way. So the Oregon Trail was littered with furniture, china, books, and other cherished objects. For 40 days, the 49ers crossed rolling prairies in what is now Kansas and Nebraska. It was Indian territory, where tribes from the east had been relocated a decade earlier. Fears of Indian raids proved mostly groundless, but men were more likely to die of drowning at a river crossing or by an accident with their own gun than they were at the hands of the Indians. The Sac, the Fox, the Pawnees, the Kickapoos, they charged tolls at bridges and fords, and the Potawatomi sold the immigrants bacon, beef, and vegetables and charged from $1 to $5 to ferry immigrants across the Kansas River. The real danger on the plains was cholera. With its soaring fever, cholera, dysentery, and ghastly death from dehydration, cholera was rampant all across the United States in 1849, and it quickly spread through the wagon trains. Some 15,000 of the gold seekers who set out for California that spring died from it on the trail. Accidental shootings, as I said, was the main cause of death on the overland trails. The second major problem was drowning, and more than 300 people died this way between 1840 and 1860. 19 immigrants drowned crossing the Platte River near Fort Laramie in 1849. The year following, 49 immigrants drowned at the North Fork. The Overland Trail. Well, that was the longest road in history. It was a river at the top. It was a river of white-topped wagons. One settler said, "We haven't seen the other end of our train for 18 days. The team of horses ahead of them had eaten most of the trail grass, so they had fed their oxen, horses, and mules a precious grain that they had saved for the desert. For 1,000 miles, they followed the Platte River and the Nebraska seacoast, as it was called, and it took so long to cross the river that early ones found shallow water, and the later ones who started, they would meet the spring floods. They camped in the heat of the day, and they called it nooning. It gave them a chance to visit and to catch up on their housekeeping. One woman wrote, "This gypsy life is nothing but agreeable. It's impossible to keep anything clean. Cooking and wash water were scarce and often harsh with alkali. Baby towels must be put on while still damp," one mother complained. And for some infants, much of the trip could be one long bout of diaper rash, which would lower their resistance to diseases. In the years between 1840 and 1848, an estimated 11,000 migrated overland to Oregon and 2,735 to California. One survey showed that only about 50 immigrants ever returned home before reaching their destination during this period. Now, these are surveys that they did, so you don't know how accurate they are, but that's what the surveys claimed at that time. And the main reason that they gave for going home was either poor health or fear of the Native American Indians. Well, it was estimated that in 1846, around 200 wagons and 1,500 people assembled at Independence, Missouri, to start the journey to California and Oregon. Well, that was also the year of the Donner Party, the worst disaster in wagon train history, when 42 immigrants and 2 Indian guides died in the journey. Well, that was a pretty horrible disaster, and it was caused because they started late, and due to some serious mishaps or series of mishaps, and then they ended up having to spend the winter snowbound in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And some of the immigrants resorted to cannibalism and to survive, eating the bodies of those who had succumbed to starvation, sickness, and extreme cold. So there was quite a story about the Donner Party, and there's actually some conspiracy theories about did they really die or were they actually killed? And that's a whole story and a program within itself. So about 3,000 African Americans reached California by 1850. However, the passing of the anti-Black legislation made them into second-class citizens, and most decided to move on to Canada. So when you think about the Wild West, you probably picture a dusty town full of manly gamblers and cowboys. Most people don't realize just how much of the West was run, operated, and settled by women. More specifically, the women who ran brothels, aka madams. Madams used their experience, appearance, and strong-willed personalities to generate tons and tons of money, sometimes employing brutality to get their cash. So, what was it like to be a madam in the Wild West saloon? Well, Wild West madams were fierce businesswomen, and since there wasn't a lot of opportunity for women in the mid 1800s, being a madam was really the only route to independent wealth for the women that they had. So, madams recognized how to make money and put their skills to good use. Famous madams like Mattie Silks and Jenny Rogers, they used their money to expand their businesses, pay off local politicians, and even add some legitimacy to their trade. Mattie Silks acquired the first liquor license in 1865, which was really unusual that a liquor establishment would do that. But she wanted to be ahead of her time, and being a businesswoman, she decided she was going to set an example, and she was the first one to get the liquor license. For her part, Jenny Rogers invested her earnings into the city of Denver's irrigation and reservoir infrastructure, resulting in a healthy profit. Madams also bought properties, they ran businesses, dry goods stores, and shops. They took part in other business opportunities. Basically, they parlayed their sinful jobs into highly successful business enterprises. Many madams actually spent time as prostitutes prior to or in addition to their managerial duties. Often older than their workers, madams had experience in the trade and learned from their time as active ladies of the night. Prostitution was obviously not looked highly upon at the time, and some women who engaged in that type of labor were often referred to as soiled doves. One madam, Dora DeFran, made a living as a working girl and performer before she opened several saloons and parlors of her own in South Dakota in the late 1800s. To demonstrate their immense wealth and to appear reputable, madams wore the nicest clothes and the most decent jewelry as a way to sell themselves as the owners of a high-class establishment. The finest brothels and boarding houses run by the likes of Jessie Reeves needed a proprietor who looked and behaved appropriately. Reeves also made sure that her girls' attire projected a high-class image. She often loaned her staff money so that they could purchase elegant garments, and that included hats, shoes, dresses, and gloves. Sadie Orchard, she was a boarding house owner in New Mexico. She appreciated proper English women's style and imitated them. Pearl DeVere, she was a madam in Cripple Creek, Colorado. She was a former dressmaker and spent her days riding through the gold camps in an embellished carriage. When she went through, she was trying to show men the beauty and show what they could get if they came back to her boarding house. She wore a different outfit every night, and men and women alike coveted her lifestyle. Well, madams in the Wild West identified an unmet business need and were more happy to fulfill it. So while some people disapproved of their activities in the parlor houses, many groups of Westerns of the West, including Native American tribes, acknowledged their trade as an important role. Gertrudis Barcelo, she was also called Madame Tools. She recognized this and used her gambling habit and her feminine charm to obtain money to start an establishment in New Mexico during the mid-1800s. Tools seduced several men to get the capital she needed to open her establishment. Madame Belle Breezing, the model for Belle Watling in Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, catered only to the classiest men. She gained a national reputation by pleasuring businessmen, army officers, and members of the upper class. Well, because madams needed to keep the public happy, many provided social support programs like buying clothes and school supplies for the poor. Charities were often fickle, and they would accept their money and their goods, and well, they would be barring them from attending social gatherings or withholding any sort of acknowledgement. So madams often paid their share in taxes, not willing to offend the locals or risk their businesses. Madam Jessie Reeves gave generously to children and the homeless, and she provided blankets and food to firefighters battling blazes that threatened to burn down the town. Well, to keep the customers coming back for more, madams had to ensure satisfaction. The best establishments provided well-dressed, good-looking women along with plenty of booze and entertainment. And women went to great length to meet customers' needs. They would offer blondes to men who preferred fair hair or supply shapely women to those who liked them. Madams charmed men. They laughed at their jokes and they listened to them boast, so they would stay longer and spend money and return more often. Houses with spacious rooms, full of lavish decorations didn't hurt either. Jenny Rogers earned her name as Queen of the Row thanks to her elaborate decor of her establishment in Denver, Colorado. Madams realized how to use their staff of women effectively. Madams like Tessie Wall dressed their girls in the finest European fashions and paraded them up and down the town to drum up business. She also made grand entrances at public events with her best looking ladies for attention. For competition, Madame Jessie Hayman met the challenge and started imitating Wall. Well, this prompted Wall to withholding girls from the shows, which also garnered more, it actually garnered more awareness. Stunts, manipulation, and lies were all part of Madame's repertoires. Resourcefulness could mean blackmail, something Jenny Rogers parlayed into a $17,000 payday when she threatened to expose some local politicians as frequent customers. It could also mean bribes, payoff, and under the table dealings with bellboys, hotel clerks, and owners of local establishments, all in the interest of getting more men in the door. Many madams housed their girls, taking 100% of the proceeds as payment. If a client had paid $5 for a girl's company, this could cover their expenses for a $5 room and board. So girls who made more than this could apply their surplus funds to food, clothing, or other items. But some madams weren't so generous, and girls who didn't make enough money would get thrown out into the street. The oldest profession was only one of the ways madams generated money. Gambling was common. Booze was another big seller. Madams could mark up drinks as much as 60% or simply water them down to maximize profit. Some saloon girls made money off of alcohol that they sold, but all of the funds usually went back to the madams to cover the cost of their clothes or other amenities. In addition, madams sometimes had their saloon girls steal from drunk, unconscious men, and it wasn't unheard of for a guy to pass out and wake up without any money. Criminals in the West frequented seedy and fancy parlors alike. And Fanny Porter was a madam in Texas, and she was friends with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, hosting a wild bunch, his posse, when they had their last meetup in 1901. The women here were technically criminals, and many of them spent their time in jail. Through their madam's acumen and bribery, the girls rarely went to jail for their professional activities, but they did for other offenses. In 1891, authorities arrested Ardell Smith, Blanche Morgan, and Maddie Fisher, all working girls in Denver, for poisoning a client with morphine in order to steal from him. Because of short supplies and the cost of transporting goods to California, prices for everything was sky high. Miners were often shocked to pay double or triple for everything from kettles to shovels. This was called mining the miners. And there was gold in them there, miners. A used pair of shoes might cost as high as $50 a pair. One miner complained of paying $43 for a breakfast that could have cost him only 25 cents back home. Boarding houses raked in the dough by charging $10, even $15 a month for a room. In the day when most people back east made $1 a week, there was serious cash to be made in California. But the biggest profit came from those who could provide a good home-cooked meal. Lorenza Wilson, she was one of those rugged pioneers who knew an opportunity when she saw one. When her husband told her that he wanted to leave Missouri and head to the gold fields of California, Wilson packed up her 3 kids and her family and made their way overland to the West Coast. Arriving in Sacramento, she found that as one of the few women there, she had a special skill. That was making homemade biscuits. Wilson had just cooked dinner at her family's camp one night when a miner came along and offered her $5 for just one of her biscuits. Well, at first she was too stunned to reply, but then the other guy thought Wilson was holding out for a higher price, so he upped the ante to $10, which is about $240 in today's money. Wilson realized that more money could be made from selling biscuits than actually panning gold. So let's talk a little bit, switch gears and talk a little bit about the minorities in the West Coast. The gold rush attracted immigrants from around the world. And in fact, by 1850, more than 25% of California's population had been born outside of the United States, which was really, really amazing. As news of the discovery was slow to reach the East Coast, many of the first immigrants to arrive were from South America and Asia. And by 1852, more than 25 immigrants from China alone had arrived in America. As the amount of available gold began to dwindle, miners increasingly fought one another for profits and anti-discrimination tensions soared. The government also got into the act too. In 1850, California's legislation was passed. They passed what was called a foreign miners tax, which levied a monthly fee of $20 on non-citizens, and that was the equivalent of more than $500 in today's money. Well, that bill was eventually repealed, but it was replaced by another in 1852 that expressly singled out Chinese miners, charging them $2 a day, which was $80 in our, no, $2, I'm sorry, a month, which is equivalent to $80 in today's money. Violence against foreign miners increased as well, and beatings, rapes, and even often murders were commonplace. However, no ethnic group suffered more than California's Native Americans. Before the gold rush, the Native population numbered roughly 300,000. Within 20 years, more than 100,000 would be dead. Most died from diseases or mining-related accidents, but more than 4,000 were murdered by enraged miners. Images of Native Americans and African American cowboys are rare, but they were an important part of the Western Territory history. These photos were taken somewhere between 1860 and 1870, and one in four cowboys was black, and they were paid as the cowhands to round up wandering cattle after the Emancipation Act. One man claimed right after the Civil War, being a cowboy was one of the few job openings to men of color who didn't want to work as a delivery boy or a similar occupation on the West Coast. Well, for periods of time, the Old West was between 1850 and 1890. The Western frontier had little in the way of government or law. They had no sheriffs, so men carried guns to protect themselves. They were outlaws who stole from people and lawmen who tried to stop them. Today, we call these men gunfighters or gunslingers. And at the same time, they were called gunmen or shootists. Some of them were lawmen or sheriffs, and some were outlaws and murderers. So let's talk about Jessie James. He was one of the famous names you've heard of. People like to believe that Jessie James was one of those compassionate thieves who stole from the rich and he gave to the poor. But there's really no evidence that ever supported that claim. He was born in 1847, and he and his brother Frank came from a slaveholding farm family in Missouri. When the Civil War revved up, they joined the Confederate Army. They were just teenagers at the time, but they immediately found themselves riding with a death squad, which traveled from farm to farm, slaughtering anybody with Unionist sympathies, many of them old neighbors. They apparently gave Jessie a taste for blood and chaos. Well, after the war, he carried on fighting, riding with his mentor, Archie Clement, who made a habit of robbing banks owned by triumphant Unionists. So when Clement made an ambush or killed, James carried on the tradition, thieving and murdering with abandon. He eventually, but eventually, the old slave-holding class got the upper hand politically in the southern states. And when it did, Jesse James was no longer their rebel ally. He was just a murderous thug who couldn't play by society's rules, even when society was on his side. So in 1882, the new governor of Missouri arranged a secret meeting with Robert and Charlie Ford, two of Jesse's remaining gang members. For a short time later, while Jesse was dusting a picture, or just afterwards, he was dusting a picture in his living room, and Robert shot him in the back of the head. It was actually the end of his notorious career. Another one was Billy the Kid. William Bonney was his real name, and he also went by the name of Henry McCarty, but he'll always be remembered best as Billy the Kid. He had a short career as an outlaw. By the time of his death, he was only age 21, and he had reportedly killed 8 men. He had become a fugitive after shooting dead a blacksmith who had been bullying him in a bar fight. And after some cattle rustling, he took part in a violent feud known as the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, and in which he sided and fought the gang members called the Regulators. Accused and later convicted of killing Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady during the conflict, the Kid remained at large for some time and famously shot and killed Joe Grant at Hargrove Saloon in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Grant had allegedly come after him, but after the Kid asked to admire his would-be assassin's gun, a fight ensued, and Billy the Kid was shot. Well, Pat Garrett's captured. But he wasn't killed. Pat Garrett captured him in December of 1880, and he was sentenced to death only to escape again, killing both of his guards in the process and remaining on the run for 2 months until Garrett tracked him down again at Fort Sumner. The Kid died on the 14th of July in 1881 in a shootout with the sheriff, who then collected the bounty of $500 for his reward. Garrett later wrote a book called The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. Well, it was interesting because not too long ago, maybe some of you remember this, I think National Geographic or the History Channel did a story about this, but it's not every day that you walk into a secondhand store and you plop down $2 and walk away with some junk that's worth a fortune. And that's what happened when a collector purchased a 4x5-inch tintype. It was a photo from Fresno, California, and he found it in an antique shop there. And it turned out that the infamous outlaw Billy the Kid was in the photo, apparently taking part in a leisurely game of croquet. The image is estimated now to be worth up to $5 million. And here he bought it for $2. It shows Billy the Kid in the summer of 1878. It may have been taken at a wedding, and he was alongside several members of his gang, the Regulators. Well, there was also a female outlaw. This was Belle Starr. They called her the Queen of Outlaws, the female Jessie James, the bandit queen, or the petticoat terror of the plains. For more than 100 years, books and movies have been made about her legendary life as an outlaw. Her real name was Myra Maybelle Shirley, and she was born in Missouri in about 1848. And she had a very fine upbringing. She went to the Cartridge Female Academy. She mastered all kinds of languages. She had Greek, Latin, Hebrew. She played piano. So she was a very well-educated person. But when the U.S. Civil War unleashed chaos, it caused her to move to Dallas, Texas, where she wed a Confederate vet named Jim Reed, who made a career out of armed robbery. And that's where she started to get into trouble. And together they had a daughter, Pearl, and a boy named Eddie. So they occupied, or the occupational hazards of Jim's work earned him an early death, and Myra, who had dubbed herself Belle by that time, eventually found refuge in Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma, where she married Sam Starr. And so Sam and Belle were arrested twice for horse thieving, and Belle actually served time in Detroit. Well, later, after Sam and the lawmen killed each other in a gunfight, Belle successfully proposed to Sam's adopted brother. His name was Jim July Starr, who was 15 years her junior. And Jim was a Cherokee, and together they farmed land in the Oklahoma's Indian Territory. Well, Belle was 41 in the winter of 1849 when she blasted off her when she was blasted off her horse by a shotgun. Whoever pulled the trigger did so at close range to make sure that she was dead, and her murderer was never caught, and nobody ever learned why she died. Another one was another bandit or outlaw was called William Bill Dooling, and like the early Dalton gang alone, they they specialized in bank robberies, trains, stagecoaches in Arkansas, Kansas, Indiana, and Oklahoma during the 1890s. Bill was never a hardened criminal as some of his companions were, but they worked several ranches during that decade, and he was actually considered widely trustworthy and capable. But by the 1890s, however, Doolin became at least a part-time thief, and for 6 years he participated in a variety of bank and train robberies, sometimes in partnership with the infamous Dalton gang. Well, Doolin planned his robberies well, although he was shot several times and wounded, but he was never serious. So he managed to avoid a lot of conflict and avoid some of the sheriffs, but he managed to elude one group. But when the posse finally caught up with him a lot in Oklahoma, he apparently decided he was not going to be captured, and he was badly outnumbered, and he drew his gun. But then a rain of bullets and a rifle fired instantly and killed him. He was 38 years old, and he's actually buried in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Another one was Cherokee Bill, and he was actually a Cherokee Indian. He was, when he was about to die, his final words were, I came here to die, not to talk, so let's get it over with. That's some, that was quite a last words, but who knows if it's true or not. It's just a legend, but some seem that it's, it gives him an interesting aspect to his character. So some say that he killed his brother-in-law when he was 14, and some say that he was 12. Either way, his career began when he joined the group of outlaws, and they were Bill and Jim Cook, who he joined them at age 18, and then they began the season of robbery and murder in Indian Territory that lasted from May through December of 1894, when he was captured. Well, a violent prison break during which he killed a guard failed, and in April of 1885, he was sentenced to die by hanging. And on St. Patrick's Day of that year, that's when he uttered his famous words. Well, here's a guy that we talked about earlier, Butch Cassidy. His real name was Robert Leroy Parker, and he was better known as Butch Cassidy. He was born in 1866 in Beaver, Utah. He was the oldest of 13 children in a Mormon family. He began a life of crime by stealing a pair of jeans and quickly moved to larger scale robberies. But around 1896, he formed a group called the Wild Bunch, along with it was a group of his friends. He was the leader of the notorious gang, and they roamed through Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and South Dakota, and robbed trains and banks. Stealing cattle and horses, he would go out to recruit a man by the name of Harriet Alonzo Langenbaugh, who was actually, you've heard of this, the Sundance Kid. Well, the gang enjoyed immense success with train robberies until they came to the attention of the Pinkerton Agency. In 1901, Butch fled to South America with Sundance, traveling to Argentina and ultimately on to Chile and Bolivia. Uh, they led a relatively quiet life, probably punctuated by a couple of bank jobs or bank robberies. But they both believed that they had not been killed in a shootout with police, and until they met up with a lawman in November of 1908. And after robbing a carrier carrying a payroll of a silver mine, uh, they were or he was killed. He claimed that he actually claimed that he had never killed anyone, which was interesting. Um, he engaged in criminal activity for more than a decade, but again, never killing anyone. So let's talk about the Sundance Kid here. Again, that's Harry Alonzo Langenbaugh. He was better known as the Sundance Kid. He was a member of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. Um, Wild Bunch gang performed a long string of successful train and bank robberies in American history. He fled the United States along with Butch Cassidy, and then they fled to first Argentina, and as I said, they went to Bolivia. And it's believed that they were both killed in a shootout in November of 1908, but nobody could really ever prove that. This is Wyatt Earp. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. This is Wyatt Earp, and he was a famous lawman in several Wild West towns, including Wichita, Dodge City, and Tombstone, Arizona. He earned his reputation as the toughest and deadliest gunslinger of the Wild West. Um, so he was quite an interesting person. This is a picture of him when he died at age 80. He actually lived quite a long life. Doc Holliday, he took on the McGlory and the Clanton brothers, and during the fight, both the McClary brothers and Billy Canton were killed. Wyatt wasn't even wounded. The shooting, they call that, was the gunfight at the OK Corral today. But you know, the interesting thing was they made movies about that, but the actual gun, the gunfight only lasted all of 30 seconds, and they fired about 30 shots. Um, Bill Hickok, Wild Bill Hickok. He was a deadly gunman and Old West folk hero. He was said to have been a great shot, even as a youngster, and he was known for his marksmanship. And when he was 18, he headed out west, and he worked as a stagecoach driver. And they even suspected that during the Civil War, he might have been possibly a spy. So that was interesting. He took over as marshal in Abilene, Texas in 1871. However, in December of the same year, he was discharged of his duties following a string of dubious shooting incidents, including the accidental killing of his own deputy. Well, after that, Hitchcock traveled with Bill Cody's Wild West show for several years, and that's where many of you probably have heard the name. So let's go on to another one, Bill Pawnee. He was famous for his partnering with Buffalo Bill, and he was part of the Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He eventually started his own act, and he called it Pawnee Bill's Great Wild West Show. He married May Lilly, who was also a celebrated sharpshooter and equestrian, and they had a show. She was actually dubbed the greatest lady on horseback, and he died in 1942 at the age of 81. He was actually in 2010 was actually inducted into the Hall of Great Westerners in the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. And it was interesting that it was so many years after he had died. And here's a woman that I know many of you know, Annie Oakley, sharpshooter Annie Oakley. She was well known for her marksmanship. She had many medals for that. Um, this photograph was used to advertise her performances for the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. She traveled with him. Um, she actually she lived to be, an elderly woman, and she died actually of pneumonia in Greensville, Ohio. So we're running kind of a little long. I apologize for that. I want to just kind of jump into some ghost towns a little bit. I'm going to kind of jump over the introduction, and I just want to tell you that there are actually classifications when you talk about ghost towns. The barren ones, those are the ones that are out there, but not really in existence anymore. You may stumble across footings or foundations and some rock formations where the buildings once stood. The neglected sites, those they're no more than dilapidated buildings, some rubbish, but nothing's there, not much there. The abandoned sites, they still have houses and buildings and they're still standing, but they have nothing inside or anything living in them, or anyone living in them. Sometimes the property will have a caretaker who lives nearby the property. Semi-abandoned site is a ghost town. It's a living ghost town. It'll have buildings and houses still standing. Most of them are abandoned though, but you do find a pocket of people living around or nearby them. A few residents still remain, and they may have a store or two there. And then there's the historic ones, and these are sites like Virginia City, Nevada, Tombstone, Arizona, Cripple Creek, Leadville, just to name a few. And those have buildings and houses that are still standing, but much of the town has been converted to historical site, a museum, or a tourist attraction. Um, this is a website. And it has an interactive map that shows you everything in red is where there are actual ghost towns in the United States, and it's interactive because you can go on and you can click on your state or your area, and it will pull up a whole list of the gold or the ghost towns in that area. So it's kind of a fun site. Um, let's see, here's a route that you can take if you go. This is actually, we'll talk about California first. This is a route that you can take to see some of these ghost towns that are in California. Most of these are accessible by a regular car. You don't need a four-wheel drive. However, some of the ghost towns are in the mountainous regions, and they're off the beaten path, and you will need a four-wheel drive to get to them, and because it's very rugged terrain. I remember going to some of these, and boy, we had to take a four-wheel Jeep to get out there, and it was really, I mean, you were really jarred by the time you got back. So one of the ghost towns is called Randsburg, California. This is a semi-abandoned ghost town. There's still a few people living there and a few shops. It's really a cool place to go if you're a photographer. It's got a population of about 50 people. You can see it looks a little bit more lived in than some of your traditional ghost towns. It does have, a barber shop that you can go into. It's just kind of fun. There's another picture of some of the shops that are still there. They have kit fox, jackrabbits, cottontails, hawks, eagles, coyotes. Those are some of the animals that live around Randsburg. Costa's hummingbirds, they come visiting during the summer. I've been out there where there's been just tons of hummingbirds they just come right to you. It's amazing. Yeah, tarantulas. Fall is breeding season for tarantulas, and they're everywhere. So you want to be very careful if you go out there in the fall. Just up a bit is Lone Pine. It's a gateway to Death Valley. It's the largest Well, and actually in 1872, an earthquake hit and it destroyed most of the town. It killed 27 people and most of its, and it killed 27 of the 250 to 300 residents. A lot of Western movies were filmed here. Um, it's kind of a fun little place. This is a lobby of a hotel outside of Lone Pine. So Laws, California, that's a settlement originally called Station. It was formed in 1888 as a depot on the Carson and Colorado Railroad. The name was changed to Laws in honor of R.J. Laws. He was a railroad official. A postcard office operated at Laws from 1887 to actually till 1963. They have a railroad depot set up there, and you can walk through and see what they looked like back in the day. Here's Darwin, California. It was a silver and lead mine, and they discovered it back in about 1874. Post office opened there in 1875, but it closed for a time in 1902 and still remains open today. It has a population of about 30 people today. Well, here's Keeler, California. It's barely living ghost town. It's in the deep the deep Death Valley area, and lawless ghost town. It's famous for its riches and it was famous for its riches and its death rate. Sometimes you have to be a little careful when you go into these ghost towns with very few people, however, because oftentimes the people that live out there, they want to be alone for a reason, and today you're not always welcome if you go there. So it's just something you should be aware of if you're going out there to some quite remote areas. Bellerant, it was a mining town in the 1880s. It had over 500 families at the time, and it closed down in about 1917. Everybody left the buildings. They just became abandoned. Interestingly enough, if you've heard this name, Bellerant, the infamous Manson family lived here in 1969. Well, here's the most famous um, ghost town that people always refer to, and that's Brody, California. It's a genuine gold mining ghost town. You can go there and see the authentic way of life that people had or that they lived during the gold rush. It's now a state park. It's not restored, but it's preserved. So from 1887 to 1882, Brody was a bustling town. It had more than 10,000 residents and produced more than $35 million in gold and silver. Today, with some gold mining days of the gold mining days of California have a distinct memory with about 200 abandoned wooden buildings in a state of arrested decay, they say. It's great for photographing and to just explore. If you get a chance to go there, they say that it's supposedly haunted, which is interesting because they claim that anyone who takes an item from Brody will be haunted until they return the item. And so the state park rangers have said that they received numerous letters and people returning items that saying that they've been cursed ever since they took the item and they want to return it to its rightful owner. So Brody is an amazing ghost town like no other. And if you enjoy that kind of thing, you really must see that. Let's talk quickly about Nevada. There's a few, I'm not going to go into all the ghost towns, but we will talk about just some of these quickly. Nevada has quite a population of gold mines. And actually, there's very little of them now that are left. When it originally started, there were a lot of mines, but many of them became dangerous. And there's actually a new program to seal off the entrances to those mines because many people are trying to sneak into them and get hurt. Here's a suggested route if you're going to go see the Nevada mines. It starts at you can start at Dayton and go down to Las Vegas. It's about a 7.5 hour trip if you go all the way. Probably want to take some time to stop along the way, so probably take 2 days. Virginia City is a favorite tourist site. Got lots of shops, candy stores, bars, ice cream shops. There's still feral horses that run through the streets. Um, Virginia City developed as a boom town in about 1859 with the discovery of the Comstock lode, the first major silver deposit discovery in the United States, with numerous mines opening. Its population peaked in the mid 1870s to about 25,000 residents. And when the mining output declined after the 1870s, the population declined to about 4,000 people today. Well, right next door is Gold Hill. Prosperity was sustained in Gold Hill for a period of 20 years between 1868 and 1888, again, prospering by the Comstock lode. The major deposit of gold and silver ore. Mines such as Yellow Jackets, Crown Point, and Belcher brought in over $10 million each in dividends. Historic remains of the town can be seen. There's the Gold Hill Hotel. It's promoted as Nevada's oldest hotel. The former Bank of California building, the restored Virginia and Trustee Railroad Depot. There's the Depression era Crown Point Mill, and remains of several other mines and residences in various state of restoration or repair. Dayton, we have the little town of Dayton. It served as a commercial hub for miners working in the canyon. In 1857, many of the Chinese miners came to this area to avoid mining taxes directed at the Chinese in California. With the 1857 discovery of the Comstock lode, it's the newly founded Gold Hill in Virginia City assumed prominence, and most miners headed up the canyon. But by 1860, the town was primarily occupied by Chinese miners, and it was called Chinatown. So many people avoided going there. And here's Tanofa, and this is 113 acres of mining history. It's worth going to if you actually want to go on an actual mine tour. You can see the original mines and equipment, artifacts. The mining park is filled with dramatic views and a 50-foot with 50-foot or 500-foot drops and illustrated mine shafts. Here's Belmont. It's an hour from the little town. It's an hour from Tenofia, and this one is so small that you don't even find it on the Google Maps. Belmont was established following the Snake River in 1865, and other minerals such as copper and lead were also mined in addition to the silver. And the town boasted of 4 stores, 2 saloons, 5 restaurants, a livery stable, post office, bank, school, telegraph office, 2 newspapers, and a blacksmith shop. And as the price of metal fluctuated, so did the fortunes of the town. And by 1887, most of the mines had closed. The post office was in operation from 1867 until May of 1911. And then it started up again and ran until 1922. So like many towns that were ghost towns, it didn't last all that long. Goldfield is another boom town within the 20th century due to the discovery of gold. It produced more than $86 million at current prices today. Much of the town was destroyed by fire in 1923, although some of the buildings still survive. Goldfield was somewhat, it's become somewhat of an artist community today. Parts of the cult classic there was a car chase movie called Vanishing Point that was filmed here in Goldfield. Some of the more interesting sites in Goldfield are pieces of eclectic artwork around the community. you must visit the International Church of the Car Forest, it's called. Um, it's really quite an interesting site. You'll also see lots of wildlife there along the way, such as wild burros running around. We got two more here. There's Gold Point, and that is there's only about 2 or 3 people still living there. It's mostly most of the town is abandoned, but it's pretty well reserved as or preserved as a ghost town. It was first settled by ranchers and miners in the 1880s, but it wasn't until gold was discovered that the town would thrive and aptly name it Gold Point. And the last one is Rhyolite. Finally, the town began in about 1905. It was one of several camps that sprung up. And again, it was during the gold rush that thousands of gold seekers and developers and miners, they would flock to this area. Many settled in Rhyolite, which lay in the sheltered desert basin where the region's biggest producers, it was called the Montgomery Shoshone Mine. And this is interesting that industrialist Charles M. Schwab, he bought the Montgomery Shoshone Mine in 1906 and invested heavily into its infrastructure, including piped water, electric fans, railroad, transportation that served the town as well as a mine. It actually started to decline, and estimated the peak population was at its peak was between 3,500 and 5,000. But in 1920, by 1920, most of the people had left, and its population went to 0. So anyway, for those of you that are interested in going on a ghost town tour, you can see the here's a interactive site that's really good. It's GeoTab. It has over 3,300 ghost towns across the U.S. You can also go on Wikipedia and look up there's a list of ghost towns in California. And the best one is actually Legends of America, where I find a lot of my material for tonight's presentation. So it's really a great site to do that. We had a lot to cover. I'm not sure that I'm going to get to all of these questions. I will try to. I think most of the questions that came in were not. I'm seeing that people answered, and I'll tell you what. If you didn't get your question answered, there is my email. And feel free to send me an email, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have. So thanks for joining us this evening. As again I said, this program will be recorded, and it will be you'll be able to. I better double check on that. It was supposed to be recording. Yes, it is. So you'll be able to play back the recording. You'll get a link in an email. Our next program is History Preserved in Quilts. It's all part of our Sharon Historical Lecture Series. We've got quite a few coming up in the next several months. You can see a list of those. If anyone is interested in obtaining more information, we have a program listing of all of our upcoming programs, as well as a newsletter we put out. And you can contact us here. Just send us an email at the Sharon Historical Society, NY. Don't forget that NY, because there's a couple other Sharon locations. And so it's important to put that Sharon Historical Society, NY at Gmail. But again, I want to thank you all for coming tonight and being part of this presentation. And it was a lot to cover, and I'm sorry we went over a little bit, but again, feel free to either email me personally or you can give me a call at the phone number there. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next presentation.